vertebrae, sacrum coccyx, vertebrae, sacrum coccyx, let me get that out of the way, okay? And then we come around the front, and I neglected to say at the beginning of the period, the hyoid bone right here, which is about right up in here.
That's great.
And then the sternum and the ribs. These are all axial bones, okay? Couple quick things. Remember that axial joints, or if you maybe you don't know this, they don't move that much. They move, but not tremendously. And so they are built a particular way. They are not synovial joints. They're usually fibrous joints or cartilaginous joints. Okay, so we got the basic rundown. We start off with a basic vertebra. This is a vertebra. It has two major parts and then lots of subparts. The first major part is in my fingers. It's called the body of the vertebra. And you have a articulation here with a fibrocartilage intervertebral disc and one below. As a little piece of trivia, this person had some pretty bad arthritis in their lumbar vertebra. All this bony crest is all arthritic growth, okay? So this person had back pain, no doubt, all right? We see that in a lot of these skeletons. They're typically from older people. And arthritis moves into the lumbar vertebrae with age. The next major part is an arch. And I think you can recognize that there's an arch here, even though it has lots going on. Body and the vertebral arch. I guess you could say that this is a piece of anatomy, even though it's empty. This is called the vertebral foramen, and that's where the spinal cord and nerve roots would be located. So let's say there are actually three parts: body, arch, vertebral foramen. Okay? So then we need to take a look at the vertebral arch. It's got a number of parts. We'll learn a few. First thing is, it's always going to have articulations with the next vertebra up and with the next vertebra below. Okay? So on this lumbar vertebrae, we have articulations for, they typically call them facets, and they go up and they go down. Those aren't on your pink sheet, forget about them. The other articulation points then could be elsewhere, like on the body or on this process right here called transverse process. We'll learn more about that in a minute. The arch has two transverse processes, one on each side, and then a central, posteriorly pointing spinous process. Okay? Go to the beach, see someone without their shirt on, you see the bumps of the spinous processes sticking on the back. Okay? This is, by the way, got a lot of muscle around it, but you oftentimes do at least see the bump. Transverse processes, spinous process. Attaching the vertebral arch to the body are these points here and here. These are called the pedicles. Okay, and the pedicles are kind of the feet, feet of the vertebral arch. And then these flat portions of the vertebral arch are called, I believe they're called the lamina, I believe. Okay? All right, so let's do it again. Body, vertebral foramen, vertebral arch, pedicle, lamina, transverse process, spinous process. We have, they're not on the pink sheet, just FYI, superior articular facets, inferior articular facets. Okay, basic vertebra. All right, this is a cervical vertebra. The cervical vertebrae are obviously going to be a bit smaller than the lumbars. Okay, there's a heck of a lot less weight on them, although I have a large head, which means lots of brain. But it does also mean then I have a lot of weight on my cervical vertebrae. But the cervical vertebrae are always, at least the bodies, are not nearly as large as they are in lumbar. Okay? But there are some other characteristics. And this is the best characteristic. The cervical vertebra has a vertebral foramen, but its transverse processes have openings called the transverse foramina for plural, transverse foramen for singular. Only cervical vertebrae have transverse foramina, the only ones. When you look at the circulatory system, you will find that two blood vessels that bring blood to the brain utilize the transverse foramina as the passageway to get there. So there are literally two blood vessels in these vertebrae rising up to the brain. Okay? All right. The cervical vertebra then is otherwise a little smaller. Sometimes its spinous process is forked, but not always, particularly in transition areas from cervical to thoracic. It's hard to tell using just the forked appearance. Look for the holes. Two of the cervical vertebrae are different than the others. This, although it's a little bit broken, this is a cervical vertebra as well as this. This is the first one. So anatomists would call it C1. But they've also come up with a cutesy name to help you remember. They call it the Atlas. And the Atlas comes from Greek mythology. What did Atlas hold upon his shoulders?
The world.
The world. That's your world. The Atlas articulates with the occipital condyle that flanks the foramen magnum, like that. And the spinal cord passes. By having this nice fossa here and that condyle, the head can say yes. Okay?
Yes.
This is C1, the Atlas. Can you give me your axis? I thought you had an axis over there. Okay. This is C2. It's known as the axis. If I count holes, if it's not broken, which this one is, no, actually, no, it's not. 1, 2, 3. 3 holes, it's cervical. The axis articulates with the Atlas. Notice the axis has this big pointy finger called its dens. The dens articulates with a facet on the anterior arch of the Atlas. These two can then slide side to side. And I can say, extra credit? No. Okay? C1 and C2. Which one is this? I don't know. It's probably one of the lower ones because its spinous process isn't forked. It seems like the upper ones, except for C1 and C2, tend to have more of a forked spinous process. Okay? This is a thoracic vertebra. When you look at it, you see one big hole. Sometimes the body has drill holes, but those are artificial. Those are not natural. Okay? It has its vertebral arch. It has its lamina. As a matter of fact, they're very easy to see here. It has its transverse processes and its spinous process. The big difference between cervicals and thoracics, lack of holes on this one, just one, and then we have touch points for ribs on these. And these will be hard to see from a distance. The body of a thoracic vertebrae may have 2 articular facets that allow it to articulate, and this may not be the rib that goes with it, allows it to articulate with a rib like that. So there are 2 touch points, and they are flat and smooth, so that this head of the rib can articulate with the body, and then there's always a facet, or almost always a facet, on the transverse process to accept this portion of the rib. That allows for a joint that allows the rib to hinge in place. Only thoracic vertebrae have articulation points for ribs. The upper ones are going to have them on 2 on the body, 1 high, 1 low, and 1 on the transverse process on each side. The lower ones, where the floaters are, you may just get a facet on the body only. If you come up and take a look, or if you look at one, you're going to see that these lower thoracics, where the floating ribs are, We just don't see touch points on the transverse process, just on the body. Okay? If it helps, many of the spinous processes in the thoracics are downward pointing, but not all. In the transitional area, you can't use that as a characteristic. In the transitional area, you can't use it as a characteristic. But centrally, you can see how they all point down. You can see how that one points down. Okay? If I didn't tell you, again, these are numbered. There are 7, C1 through C7. These are numbered T1 through T12. Okay? All right? The last one is lumbar. And lumbars are big, obviously. They're big. There's a lot of weight that comes upon the lumbar vertebrae, everything, all the upper body. Okay? Right here, no surprise they get a little arthritic. Lumbars do not have rib articulation points on the bodies. You look on the body superiorly, inferiorly, no facets. A facet is a shallow flat area. Shallow flat area, okay? The transverse processes are present. There are no holes in the transverse processes. They're not cervical. Finally, the spinous process is typically broad and flat. One book says, if you look at a lumbar from the side, it looks like a moose's head.